So today we continue our lecture sessions on the socio-cultural systems. Well, when we are talking about culture, and the last lecture, if you remember, we discussed something about the nature of culture as being something which is acquired and something which is, we had already discussed about the symbolic dimensions. But what is important is that culture is also, because it is acquired and it is not inherently genetic, or it is not a part of our given, genetic constitution. It is got a human beings have a creative capacity. So culture is also creative in the sense that when we are here talking about adaptation, we are talking about ecology. And as I had explained, as human beings, we adapt to our environment, our natural habitat, through a technology. Technology is a system of knowledge, a system of knowledge which enables us to transform the natural habitat into a form which is more suitable for our consumption, whether it is in the form of food, it is in the form of shelter, which are very basic. But as we know that from very simple we come to very complex technological systems where um, the complexity of this mode of adaptation, that is the transformation, which we call production basically. Production is something which is naturally occurring, any resource that is naturally occurring, which is transformed for human consumption, for our use value. So, technology is a know how, technology is a knowledge system, and all knowledge systems are creative and they are part of our culture system, right? But technology in itself is only a, it's just a, you know, is something which is there, which some you may have, but it also needs to be applied, to be used. And technology cannot be used, or is never used, except through what we call as a set of social relationships. These social set of social relationships through which we use technology, we call as our economy or economic system. Economy is not about money. Economy is about the way resources are distributed, the way technology is used, that is the division of labor, who can do what, who has access to what, and who has the right to perform certain tasks, and who has the right of consumption as well. So, these are some of the very basic principles which we apply when we try to understand how different human societies adapt to their environment. Now, talking about sustainability again, um, we today we are in a particular mode of adaptation, which we call as industrial civilization. Rather, we have gone post-industrial also. But this is not the way that human beings have adapted to the environment. This is a very recent phase, and such a recent phase that it is barely covers a minuscule part of our existence as Homo sapiens. the majority part of our existence as Homo sapiens has been in the form of an acquisitive economy, a very simple form of economy where it is called acquisitive because it is does not transform the environment, or it minimally transforms the habitat. You acquire what is readily available to you in its natural state in the habitat. Now, last time we had just touched upon it, but today I will elaborate on this system. Not that we, as you know, having already entered into the post-industrial phase, are going to ever likely to go back to this stage. That is not possible, and that will never happen. But it is important to note that there are still living societies in this world who are using this form of economy or this form of technology. And that, which means that this particular form of adaptation has survived over millions of years, because this is the what we began with, and this is something which we still have. And very interestingly, those who are anthropologists know, and of course those who have been in touch with these communities who still practice this form of economy, is that they do so happily, in the sense that somebody who is a hunter gatherer, who is in this particular phase, does not really want to change. Like, for example, forest dwellers don't want to come out of the forest. People who are, kind of, people have to be really forced to change this kind of life. So in that sense, we can understand that it is not just a way of getting a livelihood, it is also a way of life, which is very attractive to the people who practice it. Uh, if we go back into evolution, of course, we know that over the periods of time, as different technologies were discovered, people transformed. And of course, people must have transformed willingly. But again, we do not know. I mean, I'll come to that later. But what I'm trying to say is that uh, today, when we are kind of reversing our understanding of concepts such as what is a good life, what is adaptation, what is development. Uh, there is a lot of rethinking that can be done. Rethinking in the sense that the kind of confidence that was developed in the initial phase of transition to the industrial mode of adaptation, or even to the agricultural mode of adaptation. We do not know much about how people thought when they transited to the agricultural mode of adaptation, but we certainly know the philosophies of the industrial revolution, the renaissance, the entry into age of reason. And certainly there was this philosophy of a great deal of confidence in the human ability to transform nature and in the human ability to exploit. And why at the end of the 20th century there is rethinking is because somehow this has been a failed system, as today we know we are continuously facing environmental disasters and all that, all those issues which actually it is a threat to human existence. We are entering into what scientists say a phase of species. But leaving that aside, this rethinking is what is actually has made us interested to know, or rather, it has made it important to know what were the philosophies behind those modes of adaptation which survive. You see, as they say, the proof of the pudding lies in its eating. So, what is the proof? The proof is that with an acquisitive mode, with the hunting by gathering mode of adaptation, human beings have survived the maximum period. They have been able to live and also allow the environment to survive. It has, in other words, been a successful mode of it. Even though we cannot go back, as I rightly saying, that of course none of us, it is not realistic to assume that you can reverse the clock or you can go back. Although among some indigenous peoples, there are some indigenous people, especially in places like Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and even in India, indigenous people who are already in that mode of adaptation are either very reluctant to come out of it. They have to be actually forced, coerced, actually, I mean, literally driven out of it. Or, as in some more developed countries, which are not as much resource crunched as India is, so that we are so desperate for our resources, there is a back to the bushes movement. The back to the bushes movement means that people want to go back. They want to go back to the bushes. They prefer that lifestyle than the urban lifestyle to which we are all exposed. So, what are the characters of this lifestyle? As we know, if you are not actively producing, if you are not actively controlling your habitat, then in one way, it is a very precarious mode of education. Precarious in the sense that you're always on the brink of some kind of an environmental disaster. There is no buffer. There is no cushioning. So, very importantly, those who lived or are still living with this kind of an adaptation have to have what is called as a minimum, I mean, demographically, a minimum population that is kind of in tune with what is minimally available in that environment, not to times of plenty, but to famine conditions. That is, uh, there will be inbuilt cultural mechanisms, also biological and environmental mechanisms, to ensure that the population remains very low. Throughout the phase of human history, evolutionary history, where we have foraging or hunting, food gathering as the technological means of education, populations have been very low. And even today, even for those indigenous populations who are forest dwellers and who are very close to nature, their demography is very low. Is minimal, the minimum amount, the minimum carrying capacity. You see, every environment has a carrying capacity. Now, what humans have done through their technology, they have been artificially increasing the carrying capacity or the load on the environment of the human population. But the environment cannot, cope with this. So the result has been that as the human populations have been increased, we have led to a very extensive extinction of other species. And this is a problem because the environment is not just humans and their environment, right? It's not the humans and their habitat. The humans are not Neither are they a single species, neither are they the most important species. And this is something which we have now realized after, going through that entire cycle of development, that if humans as a species have to survive, they cannot survive by themselves. You need the support of other species. The environment is what we call as an ecosystem. It is not discrete species and a discrete, you know, resources. It is not that you have A, B, C, D resources and your A, B, C, D species randomly distributed. No, it is an ecosystem. System means that there is an interdependence of all species and all aspects of the environment upon each other. That is why the more humans are interfering with their habitat, the more problems they are creating for them. Going back to the hunting food gathering level, this is something which they had inbuilt into their system, into their way of understanding. The hunters and food gatherers understand this, that they are one amongst others, that all other species and all other dimensions of the environment are just as important, sometimes even more important than them. So, to begin with, at the baseline is the philosophy that human species or humans are one among many. There is nothing very special about them. If we go into all the indigenous philosophies and indigenous modes, or what we call as worldviews, you will see that there is always this, the ecosystem principle works there. There, it is already understood that every part is important and it has a relationship. Like, if you look, uh, you know, one of the oldest forms of religion known to us is totemism, and it has been misinterpreted to a very large extent. And we have the famous Freudian theory of totem and taboo that, well, it's kind of points to a neurotic state of mind and all that, but that's all not correct. What it really points to is that it indicates the understanding of a very close kinship relationship. Kinship meaning not just that a relationship of blood, but a kinship means a relationship of sentiment, a relationship of belongingness, of sameness. So when indigenous people say that their ancestors were non-human, and in these non-human were included a vast array of natural things, not just animals and birds. There were also, natural phenomena like thunder or rain, or maybe water, or the sun, or the moon. So this belief that they are our the ancestors of particular lineages was indicative of a close bond of emotional relationship. So what was the practice of this? The practice of totemism involved that one did not, or one was committed to the protection of that species. or that phenomena or that natural object. Like your water was your totem, then you were the guardians of water. You were the protectors of water because that is your kin, that is your relation. Just like you would protect your own people, your family, your parents, your children from harm. Totemic cults involved that each clan which recognized particular natural aspects of the nature as their totem were also committed to the protection, which, as you can understand, was a way in which it was kind of an insurance that every part of the environment would be protected and cared for, not just protected, cared for, like your own kith and kin. When we look into that phase of adaptation, we find that most of what is held as sacred, uh, anthropomorphic deities are unknown. In the earliest forms of religious beliefs, people did not believe that there were certain gods or goddesses with certain characters, although a belief in a transcendental power is almost universal. So even where people believe in totems or they believe in the sacredness of nature, there would be simultaneously a understanding of a transcendental power, which may be understood in different ways. But usually this was not realized by most people because this transcendental power is almost always not the object of any rituals or rites. So the rituals and rites which people could observe were mostly of, sacred parts of the nature, like the sacred forest. Now, very recently, I had gone to Shillong, Meghalaya, and the first thing which struck me, because I have been going there for many years, is the rampant destruction of nature. I mean, mercilessly, trees are being cut to widen forests, mountains are being bulldozed, dynamited to make, buildings and all kinds of modern, so called quote unquote infrastructure. But the only patches which remain of nature are the sacred groves and sacred forests. So, because some of these indigenous people still believe in the sacredness of those particular patches of environment nature, they are still being preserved. But today we also understand, and see, at one point of time, maybe 100 years back, the concept of a sacred grove or a sacred forest would have been considered as something which is a superstition. So when people converted to Christianity or they converted to some other religion or they simply became modern, they stopped believing in all that. And therefore, a lot of destruction took place. Sacred groves were also cut. So only what is little bit is remaining is still remaining. And today, because people have revived these old world views and these old, and they have understood the value of these, so they are being uh, preserved and conserved, I would say, rather not preserved, but conserved, because what we are really today talking about conservation, we are talking about sustainability, and sustainability is impossible without conservation. And such conservation, today we have to enforce it. We have to talk about it. We have to uh, literally push it down people's throat that no, you have to do this way. And of course, it is not working. As I said, that even while everywhere people are talking of climate change, rampant destruction of nature is going on simultaneously, side by side, every minute, every second of the day. So, in that primordial phase of hunting, food gathering, this did not have to be enforced. This was part of the way people live. Like there is this work done by an Israeli anthropologist on the Nayakans of South India. And she says that they consider the forest as their parents, as their mother and father. So they don't say that the forest. Now, this is a very important, very, very important point, and I will emphasize this. They do not say that the forest belongs to them. They say that they belong to the forest. Now, this may sound very simple, but this is a what you can say a paradigm shift, a threshold which we have crossed when we made the transition from an acquisitive to a productive economy. In an acquisitive economy, everywhere, people, human communities, societies do not say that these things belong to us. The stream belongs to us, or the tree belongs to us, or the forest belongs to us, or the mountain belongs to us. They say we belong to them. This absence of a sense of possession, of property, is a landmark transition where we go from a harmonious relationship with nature to a exploitative relationship. When we say that we belong to nature, obviously, if nature is seen as your parents, as your family, as your kin, as your ancestors, as sacred, then there is no question of exploitation. There is no question of destruction. People do not have to be told that you have to conserve the forest. They are committed to it because it is a commitment that you make to your parents. Nobody thinks of destroying their parents. They do not think of destroying the forest. They will rather give, everything. They would do anything. And this is also, if you look into the history of how indigenous lands were taken over, we see that enormous amount of force that had to be used. If you look into American history, if you see the way the white people they exterminated these indigenous people, the Native Americans, they didn't give up so easily. They almost died to the last person trying to defend what they considered as their family or their something to which they belong. And when I say this, it means that these people also, when you have that kind of an identity, it means that you cease to be what you are once this is taken away from you. So that is also the reason why there is such a passionate commitment to preserving this, to not give up easily. Because, and as it actually happened, because once indigenous people are taken out of the context of their environment, they cease to be. They cease to, have any identity. And because they lose their identity, they also lose their will to live, or they lose their culture, their society. They become rootless. A lot of time people say that, oh, these, like, when I went to New Zealand, Australia, no, sorry, Australia. There, the white people are always criticizing the Australian Aborigines, saying that they are all drunkards, they are useless. They are always, they don't do anything, just a drink and they lie around and they are lazy. But that is not true. Yes, there's a question.
So I just wanted to reflect on what you were saying, and this is a very important transition, as you say, from you know uh, from a protectors of the ecosystem to kind of going back into possessing the ecosystem, right? And if you see the change in our society, I mean, I began in a joint family, then we became slowly disintegrated, and then now we are nuclear. Many of the family members have passed. So my question to you, madam, is that is it the human nature that has transited to becoming very, very selfish, to say, I will possess and I don't want to go back to live together in a commune or a joint family or whatever? What has caused this? I mean, the psychology behind this, or in
So
your term, the
I'll just come to
anthropology.
that. In fact, that's a very important question, and this has actually been examined by anthropologists, by psychological anthropologists on the indigenous people. Now, this was the way in which capitalism justified itself. Just like colonialism justified itself and made itself legitimate by saying we are civilizing the uncivilized. Capitalism justified itself and made itself legitimate by saying exactly this, that this is human nature. It is human nature to be possessive and therefore and to be accumulative. So every human being wants to have more and more, and they want to have a better life in whatever their vision of better life is, that you should have more of material things. But this very question and the very assumption, this capitalist assumption, has been uh, examined, and I can give you some references. For example, Gorer, 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 was a very well known psychological anthropologist who worked on the lepchas, I think, yeah, the lepchas in the Himalayas. And he tested this on the children. Because as the capitalist system says, oh, even children are possessive. They fight over their toys. They want to take each other's toys. It is found that this was wrong. And this, I'll give you several examples of this. There, from the very small child, maybe just 10 months old or less than a year old, the parents systematically teach them to share. They will give them something, anything, like say a piece of food or a toy. And the next minute, after 5 minutes, the adults will encourage them to share. You give it to somebody else. You give it to somebody else. And the child learns that. Systematically is told that. Amongst the Kung Bushmen, there is also this work done by Pauline Weisner or Paula Weisner, I don't remember her name exactly, where she found they have this ritual called Kharo. Now, in Kharo, a child is given a bead or a bead mostly, and very small child, just when it starts to interact, say 10 months old, or when it's able to give. The first it is put into the child's hand, and then after 5 minutes, it is asked, she or he is asked to give it to anybody it wants to. Any favorite relative, to the mother, to the mother's sister, to an elder brother or any. And this is repeated. Like repeatedly, little children are given things and they are asked to give it. And what is important there is in that giving, the child is given a lot of love, care. In other words, culturally, the concept of sharing is made very important. Why? I was just coming to this point actually. See, in a relationship to the environment which is acquisitive, where you have very little control over the environment. Hmm? In the sense that the hunter goes out and the hunter has to hunt whatever is available. And sometimes nothing is available. They come back to their camps with nothing. But one person may come back with nothing, or two, or four, or five, but a few will have something. Supposing it's a band. Now, as I was telling you, the demographic is very small. So, maximum hunting food gathering bands would be 50 people, 150 people, and that too are broken into smaller units. So, when they come back, everybody is not successful all the time. But it does not mean that the person who has is successful will eat everything by himself. No, whatever comes into the band is equally shared every time, all the time. With the result that you see, they do not have this concept of possession. From day one, from childhood, from very infancy, they are this concept of sharing. If there is food, everyone gets to eat. If there is no food, then everybody starves. That is the principle on which the band holds together. And not only for food, for everything else, for protection, for child care. And this is something which actually I have observed even in I have done fieldwork in the Himalayan villages. Children seem to be everybody's property. I think these sentiments are still there in the villages, in small towns, and especially in the villages, which are fairly remote. In fact, I could hardly make out whose child was who. Because I would see the children or the babies, being all over the place. Somebody is sometimes feeding at the same baby is being put to sleep by somebody else. Another time I see somebody else is carrying the child, somebody. So this collective, the band as a collective, was encouraged. What is the worst time or sin in such communities? People who have gone and lived with them for years as part of them realize that we inherently, like one male white anthropologist who had lived with them, for a long period of time, had recounted that the first time he went and he got a very good hunt, what a very good animal. He said, like a white man, I was very proud and I came back to the band and to the camp. And I was very, was preening around that tiger. And they said everybody started shunning him. Everybody started treating him as if he was doing something very wrong. Because what is really a crime or what not crime, but you can say what is morally wrong in a banned society is selfishness, being egoistic. That is to say that, okay, I have done, I am a very good hunter. You're not supposed to say that. You're not supposed to put self above others. Everybody has equal rights all the time. And the same thing happens, you see. Now we are talking of the band level society, but these sentiments remain. These inherent values remain. So you were talking about a joint family, right? In the traditional joint family, similar sentiments were there. Even if one person said there were four brothers and one was not able to earn as much, did not mean that when he sat down to eat with the others, he was given less food. He ate what everybody ate, his children got everything in the family. And sometimes we have continuing joint families where these sentiments still exist. So, this collectivity of, and this is deliberately done. You are taught from childhood not to be selfish. You are taught from childhood to be sharing, not to be competitive. And in a capitalist society, when we are say that competition or selfishness or possessiveness is natural, it is not natural. Somewhere right from infancy, children, infants are observing their parents, they are observing the adults. If they take something of the mother, which the mother likes, she will say, oh, no, 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 give it back. You can't destroy this. This is my lipstick or my purse or my. You can't do this, she tells that. So,
So it also reflects on what I call inclusivity, the sense of inclusivity, and the sense of, so where I come from, I came from a family which was extremely inclusive. We did not differentiate between faiths.
exactly.
Yeah. So it doesn't
But
matter.
then it changes,
Yeah.
like in a joint family, even when I was young, and I still used to call, from the first to the last, not just my own sister, but my elder uncle sister, the eldest sister in the family was called Bodhi, then me. So, like, it was a continuity. It wasn't like I called only my own sister, but I used to call all the concept of this cousin. Now, this cousin is a very Western concept. In our childhood, we only knew there were brothers and sisters. We did not call any one of them cousins. They were our brothers and sisters. In a joint family, it always used to happen to the extent that even people would call their own parents as kaka and call the eldest brother as a mother and father. So this is the kind of sharing concept. It is sentiment. It is not just so. And again, this was possible because the sense of property was less. The more individual consumption, the more individual ambitions come out in material terms, people want to break out of it, because then people say, okay, no, I am earning more. Why should somebody else consume the same thing? My children should do more. My no, this, as I was telling you, like in the earlier joint family, there was no concept of my child or that child. All children were same. They belonged to the same family. They had the same sequence of siblingship. Everything was there. In the band, it is the same. All children belong to the band. Everybody takes care of them. They eat what they want. And because, coming back again to that sense of property, when you belong to the land, then whatever is there in the land is for everybody's use. In an acquisitive economy, the baseline is that you are just getting what is naturally available, and what is naturally available is for everyone. Even today, a few years back, I went to Kinnor, and in Kinnor, there were a lot of what you call in the forest chilgoza trees. Now, the local people told me that these chilgoza trees are God's gift. And anybody will go into the forest and collect as much as they like. But they never trade it. They would not sell it. Because they say it does not belong to us to sell it. It belongs to the forest, and it is God's gift. Devta ka daan hai. So we can use as much as we want. But we do not possess. See, the right of user and right of possessor. What is the difference between these two? In the traditional systems, where land was not, or any resource was not individually owned, there was no right of possession. Right of possession comes with the right of disposition also. The traditional joint families also did not break because nobody had the right over the property to sell it. It was a joint holding. Sometimes it even belonged to the divinity, to the Kul Devta. So nobody could sell it. It wasn't theirs to sell, or they did not possess it. They could only use it. They could use the land for growing food. They could use the houses, so like that. So in the same way, in that very first stage, in the acquisitive stage, since you do not own anything, you cannot also dispose of anything. Like those kinnoris, I mean, I'm not talking, they are not hunter food, rather, they are going to office, they are doing everything. Yet, they still believe that those trees that grow in the forest are the gifts of God, and they cannot I mean, they can use, they can eat as much as they keep sackfuls of chilosa and crot in their house, but they never sell it. They will consider it a sin. They will say that God will get angry. They will stop giving us this food if we sell it. It is for everyone. Like prasad, you don't sell prasad, so you don't sell. So these sentiments and patches and little bits and patches are still remaining. But earlier, the entire community was like that. So this particular, and anthropological works, because it is cross-cultural, and you go and you test these hypotheses. So anthropologists actually tested it. They went with the exposed purpose of testing this hypothesis of possessiveness, of competition. Now there is also this story that an outsider went, and this comes, has been printed in quite a few places, to village in Africa. Yeah, that is sharing. Sharing economy. I won't even call it a sharing economy. It is just an economy where the concept of property does not exist. You see, when we say property less, we are still using the concept of property. We are talking of a phase, a philosophical phase of human living, the concept itself does not exist. So this is like pre-property. So there is no, people have not yet learned about possessive. They have not learned that land is a resource that can be bought and sold. And if you really think about it, what right have human beings to buy and sell land? Did they make this land? They did. It was given. It is inherited. It is the earth. So it was very natural, and I think it was rational and legitimate for those people to think that what is growing in the forest is God's gift. I have not planted that tree. So if I have not planted that tree is there in the forest, what right have I to buy or sell it? No. So land is already there, it is given. So if the earlier people thought that it was they who belonged to the land and the land belonging to them, they were actually being more rational and more legitimate in their thinking. That is what because they didn't create the land. So what right did they have to sell it or use it? In that sense, destroy it. When I cannot create a mountain, what right have I to destroy it? No, I think it is very logical to be thinking like that, but people today don't think like that. And because they do not think like that, they are suffering also. So you see, uh, what is the basic philosophy of a band society? It is sharing and cooperation. Why? Because this is a most fundamental technology of adaptation. Look at it from a very rational, a very instrumental point of view, necessary point of view. Why is it necessary to be co-op? I mean, apart from it, because otherwise you will not survive. As I said, it is not necessary. I mean, That is, when you make a transition to a productive economy, you control the animals that you are raising. You raise herds, farming, Australia, New Zealand, all these places, America, and now also in India. You have started this farming concept that you control those animals. You breed them, you treat them to all kinds of medical procedures or whatever. You treat them as if they are not living beings. This is not the way. Even a hunter, see, even when he hunted an animal, he hunted the animal for food, never for pleasure. There's no such thing as that. And moreover, he considered the life of that animal to be exactly equivalent to that of the life of a human being. In tribal communities, in indigenous societies, I don't know whether they still do it, whenever they used to hunt an animal, they used to perform the last rites of that. They used to perform the rituals for the soul of that animal. They used to ask for forgiveness that I killed you because I was hungry, but I pray that your soul finds its destination or that you are reborn or whatever. So, animals were not treated as commodities like they are treated like in the chicken farms, in the all the animal farms. They are treated just like commodities, like they have no life. They are not living beings.
So in
That
Bengal,
itself is such a tragic philosophy. It is not being vegetarian or not vegetarian that really is
yes.
the issue. The issue is that using something for food, but respectfully respecting the life that you have taken, and to make that life into a commodity. There is the difference. Yes.
So what I'm saying is, where I come from, the state of Bengal. Of course, I've been in Maharashtra for the last 20 years. So there was this, in Kali temple many years back, at least when I've grown up, they used to have this bali of goats. It was supposed to satiate the hunger of Kali, right? And in fact, Tagore went ahead and wrote a novel called Bisharjan,
Hmm.
where he said that this is nonsense. I mean, he said it in a very, very nice story that somebody was not having childbirth, so if she gave sacrifices, she would have a child. Now it has stopped, but in certain parts of Bengal, I know, and my some of my friends boast about it that we still carry on. Nobody can touch us. So it's a question of also how our religious beliefs, so-called religious beliefs. I'm not religious at all. Perpetrate practices which are absolutely not required. You will sacrifice animals for food,
But you
fair
see,
enough.
the point here that I'm making is not about the sacrifice of the animal. See, when the animal was sacrificed, it was also seen as something which is holy, which is sacred. Today's animal farms, the way they raise these stock, the way they breed them, the way they treat them to antibiotics, I mean, this is completely like not treating them as living beings at all. You're treating them as just a commodity, just something to sell, just something to make money. And you maximize that money. You don't care for them as a life. Sacrifice, in the traditional sense, did consider that. I mean, that is what it means to be a sacrifice. Sacrifice means that life is dedicated to the deity. There's to be human sacrifices also, not just animal sacrifice. But the person who was sacrificed, or the animal who was sacrificed, is considered. You see, it is a belief system where It has actually, people say it is inhuman. What is much more inhuman is modern poultry and meat industry. It is an industry. Call it an industry. What industry? An industry that exploits the body of living animals in a very inhuman. I mean, they are not treated as you know how chicken farms. I mean, they are put in cages. They are subjected to all kinds of just to increase their weight and all that. That is a very different thing from ritual hunts or hunting as for food, not hunting for pleasure. Hunting for pleasure is again something very, very different. Is something which is absolutely to be condemned. But when they, and also they would never overdo it. Hunting food gathering societies, as I tell you, the sharing part. The sharing was also because they did not want to overdo it. If 10 people went out and one or two got some animal, they would stop. They said, this is enough. Now we will share it. Because obviously they didn't have storage, the technology of storage, but they did not have the concept of accumulation. Why accumulate? Why have more than what you need? See, this again is another philosophical transition. So, in that stage, people hunted or gathered exactly as much as they needed. Beyond that, they stopped. They said, no, we don't need it, so why? What is the reason? You see, when we say that today's people are more rational, if you just put your mind to it, you will think we are far more irrational. Why do we want to have so much more than what we can consume, what we can use? Hmm? And this is what is actually causing all that destruction of the ecosystem. This over exploitation, unnecessary over exploitation, is what I mean. People say, oh, we need, okay, we need electricity, we need, okay, I understand, we need comforts. But how many of us just stop at that? And we control ourselves and we say, okay, I have this much and I don't need more. For my comfort, okay, I'm very comfortable. I have a bed to sleep, I have food to eat, I have a house over my head, I have all the amenities. But do we stop there? We don't. So this, we say that there is this book called Stone Age Economics by Marshall Salins. It is considered a classic of this hunting, food gathering way of life, and it talks about philosophy actually much more than apart from anything else. What is a good life? Huh? You enjoy. People say, "Oh, you enjoy." Then how can you enjoy if you have leisure? In this modern world, does anybody have leisure? When they did a computation of the time schedule of hunter food gatherers, they found that hunting food gathering people had much more. I know there was a myth earlier that people transited from hunter food gatherers to agricultural economy because they wanted more leisure and it was a very hard life. On the contrary, when actual studies were done, it was found that it is not at all a hard life, it is a very happy life. That is why people don't want to transition. Because for a hunting food gathering society with this philosophy of sharing and with this philosophy of not wanting more, they actually work very little. The average work time of adult working people was not more than 2.5 hours in 24. Because how much if one, as I said, one good animal was hunted, fine, everybody ate it. People didn't go out and start shooting arbitrarily because they just wanted to accumulate. Nobody wants to accumulate. They don't have any place to keep anything. They don't have storage and they don't have the concept.
So I just want to reflect on a principle of economics that I learned, that this whole concept about marginal propensity to consume, right? It says that underdeveloped economies, for every unit a person earns per capita income, they tend to consume more. So I had a huge argument with my economics professor when I was in college. I said that means you should stop giving aid to underdeveloped economies, because they are consuming way more than they earn. So I'm relating it to what you're saying. I'm relating it to that when we went into a consumption and possessive economy, no matter what we earned, we wanted more and more and more and more, right? So this kind of begs not an answer but more questions around uh, why has human society done this, and what caused it.
We don't know why it has happened like this. This is, of course, a long, drawn out process to which we have no answers. But as I said, having come to this stage, we can go back and look at the people who may still not want to transition, and we can think about uh, alternative philosophies that have been successful in maintaining the human species. See, uh, you have a concept called poverty. Now, poverty is, at least anthropologically, defined as relative deprivation. Like in a hunting food gathering society, nobody is poor because nobody is rich. If nobody possesses anything, then how can anybody be poor? There cannot not be any relative deprivation. You all belong to the forest. Whatever you get, you share and eat. Everybody gets an equal share. Nobody has more, more, nobody has less, but nobody also has anything. There is no possession. So if there is no possession, if the concept of property does not exist, the concept of poverty itself does. I have a house you don't have. So I am poorer than you. If nobody has a house, I mean, Marx called this primitive communism, which also is not, one cannot in principle agree to it. It is because it is not a stage that one can think of using the concepts of capitalism. This, as I said, you have to think about it having washed your slate of all such concepts such as property, possession, poverty, and things like that, because they do not exist. This is prior to when these concepts came in a hunting wood gathering society. Nobody considers anybody else to be better off or less better off because everybody is exactly sharing into everything else. Yes, they may think somebody lucky if somebody some other form in some other aspect, not in material terms, but in non-material terms. Maybe they have concepts of beauty, they have concepts of children and things like that. No, that is not possible, sir, because this is exactly how I began my lecture, that having come this far, we are not going to go back. Some people have gone back, as I was talking about the back to Bush's philosophy of indigenous people, but then they didn't come out as much. Their roots were still there. They were forced out when
No,
the
no,
forests were
I
taken
did
over.
not mean that by going back. I did not
But yeah, the
mean,
philosophy, yes.
yes, I
That's what I
meant the
said. We can
philosophy.
reflect upon that philosophy. That why? I often sometimes wonder that why people want to have more and more money in the bank. More, what will you do with it? How much can you consume? When you hear about all this corruption, about somebody went away with 1,000 crores or this, what will you do? I mean, these just sound like abstract numbers to me. How much can a human being consume? What can you do that you will need that much? You don't. There's nothing. There's no way you will ever consume. So what is the point? So I think that is a kind of an irrationality into which we are in. It is not Bruno Latour has written a book called We Have Never Been Modern. And he discusses these things. He says, does modernity mean, I mean, modernity should mean you become more rational. It does not mean you become more and more irresponsible, irrational, almost childlike in your behavior. And that is what most of us are becoming. No. So, sharing, cooperation, not having concept of property, these are some of the basic paradigms organization of the hunting food gathering society. Of course, there are problems there. Problems are you are very precariously balanced. In fact, it is probably this precarity which led people to look for more, you can say, advanced technologies. That is, they made the transition from food acquisition, from acquisitive economy to productive economy, although they made it after many, a very, very long period. As I said, most of our existence as Homo sapiens, we have lived as hunters. Maybe they were forced it. We don't know. Because human evolution is something of which it's not like absolutely, recorded and understood phenomena. We are still thinking about it. We're constantly speculating about it. This is basically speculation, a reconstruction. You can only do reconstruction based upon the evidence that you have, and we have very little evidence, and we keep on getting more and more evidence every day, and every day the theories are changing, every day something new is coming up, so we don't know. This is it's like looking into a black box, not really knowing what is there. So we don't know how this transition was made, but one speculative theory is, of course, the precarity that, as I said, the entire population would be uh, adjusted to the least carrying capacity, the minimal carrying capacity of life. So obviously, if the population was adjusted to minimum carrying capacity, most of the time, the people in hunting food gathering societies, till such time as their lives were not interfered with, when they were not colonized, when they were not encroached upon, when their forest and resources were not taken away from them, had a sense of plenty. When people went and did field work in amongst the Kung bushmen, they said, "Oh, there is so much there. Why should we, work more?" 2 hours, lots of work we have done. Look at the nuts that are lying under the tree. Look at the animals in the forest. So many of them, anytime we can find. Yeah? But nature is not so bountiful all the time. There are actual famine conditions. There are conditions where people lose that sense of, people go under stress. You know, rainfall may not come, there may not be any water. Of course, the sharing and cooperation part, if you go into the details of the sharing and cooperation, this is also very complex. It is not very simple, also, all the time. Like amongst the Gung bushmen, what was the most important resource? It was a water hole. Now, the rights to a water hole, I mean, that was user right, of course, but rights to a water hole was from your membership into a band. But look at the flexibility. Now, in societies which have property, real property, the more property you have, the more inflexible become your mode of inheritance or access to that property. As societies become more individualistic, where property is concentrated amongst individuals, individuals become more important. Like in a joint family, if all the property was held in trust for all members. But as soon as the joint family broke up and you have individual property, you become very concerned about your own parentage. My child, not my brother's child. So your child and your brother's child becomes two different entities, and very significantly so. People want to give everything they earn to their own children. own blood. So those kind of things come very importantly. But till there is property, till there is collective. Now, in a community where the land is held by the entire village, then individual parenthood doesn't matter. Anybody's child is okay, like your own child, because you will be collectively taken over, cared for by the collective as well. As I said, children are collectively taken care of. They can be fed by anybody. Nobody bothers. The child is a child. You can feed the child. You can take care of it. Even breastfeeding. I've seen mothers breastfeed anybody's child. I mean, if they can, that is, if they have a child of that infant, of their infants are also going from mother to mother, being fed and all that. So, this particular transition, this also gives rise to cumulativeness. Now, if nobody has property, then nobody also has interest in accumulating property.
So, to that question, I remember very clearly in your last lecture, last session, that you talked about uh, when we transited from the hunter, gatherer kind of economy to agrarian economy or agricultural economy, uh, there were echelons of authority being built up, right? And then the authority determined what needs to be done, what needs to be done. And we see this in rampant in India, right? So the Gram Panchayat, the Panchayat leader, etc. Somewhere it works well, somewhere it doesn't because of external influences.
Yeah.
So, so are you? So my question is, when are our whole sense of living together, sharing, if we can afford it right now, transitions to authoritarian stuff, then we are losing the sense of the ecosystem because we don't respect it anymore. We want more and more individually, collectively, whatever it is. So I'd like your yeah.
There is another hand that is up. Nisha, you want to say something? Nisha? Nisha? Nisha, your hand is raised. You want to ask a question?
No, ma'am, it is by mistake. It is by
Oh,
mistake.
okay, okay. Because I saw a raised hand, so I was wondering if you wanted to ask a question. Yeah, actually, this whole transition from what we again when we are talking of banned societies, these are which we call as egalitarian society. But egalitarianism is not always total, and this is something which probably is more inherent than possessiveness or this kind of tendency for some, because it is also natural. We know that different human beings have different qualities, different characters. Like, it is very true that there are um, even in a hunting food gathering society, there will be certain people who are better hunters, who are better singers, who are better dancers, who are better craftspersons. And so initially, this was explained in terms of divine intervention. I was talking to you about totemism. There is another very ancient form of religious belief which is called in terms of supernatural powers. Not person having supernatural powers, but a kind of free floating power which can kind of animates, things in the universe. Because after all, the simple form of animation meaning having life, there is different, which even the most ancient people would have observed that there's a difference between a living and a non living object. A living object has certain abilities which a non-living object does not have. Um, it has life, it grows, it comes, it is born, it dies. And while alive, it has certain properties. It can do things which probably a non-living object cannot. This was called as animation, some kind of power. So the whole concept of power, supernatural power, uh, is believed to be coming from some ways of trying to explain animation. That how is it that sometimes people have the power to speak, to do this and that, and then you don't have. It can be a spirit, it can be just a free floating power like mana, or it could be a soul power like anima. So, this sense of power is something from which the roots of inequality. How is it that somebody is a better craftsman? How is it that somebody runs faster than others? Because this is fact. You cannot, I mean, you may say, believe that everybody should get equal share, that is one thing, that is in the action part. But if you just observe people, yes, there are. I mean, you can't deny it. I can't sing, but somebody else can sing beautifully. I can't do certain things, or you can't do certain things, or somebody else can do it beautifully. So, how come it is that Mozart could play the piano or compose music when he was 9 years old? So, how did they explain it? They said that this is divine power, mana. So, some people have more of mana, some people have less of mana. Some people are more favored by the gods, some people are not favored by the gods. And it is here from this that actually hierarchy is believed to have started. The first layer of people inequality began with the talented, the knowledgeable, the more intelligent as compared to the others because they slowly became the leaders. Initially, even in a hunting band, somebody would be a leader, somebody would be better adept at, you know, understanding nature. Who became a shaman? A shaman was somebody who simply had more knowledge or more ability than others. In relatively egalitarian societies where still people do not believe in human inequality, this power was seen as completely coming from outside. Like in a Himalayan village I was talking about, where I can feel work. Those who had, this was seen a very temporary thing. Like everybody was equal, but sometimes people would get possessed, as they say. The spirit would come to them, then they were able to perform certain things, and the spirit would go away and they would become ordinary. So, where did the power lie? The power lay in the spirit, not in the person. So, again, the person was ordinary like anybody else. But in some other situation, people may start believing that the person who has greater ability has more power, or the person itself is superior. In the sense, not possessed, but has more power, like always a good hunter, or always able to. Now, I was talking to you about the waterworks, the damming of rivers, the first civilization. But somebody somewhere had the intelligence or the power to dam the river in the first place. That first engineer, the first architect, the first astronomer, people who were the ability to read stars, predict stars, they became shamans. They were considered first maybe repositories of sacred power, and then this next stage they became sacred themselves. The first state formation, the initial formation of state societies, are what we call as theological states, states which came up on the basis of divine power. All initial rulers everywhere in the world, whether in Mesopotamia, China, India, amongst the Incas, amongst the Mayans, the first people, the first strata which forms is people who are either divinely blessed or who have divine power or who can control divine. They can be shamans, they can be gods themselves, like the pharaohs were considered as divine themselves. They were not even, they were considered gods, so they couldn't marry humans. So the pharaohs had to marry their own sisters because God cannot marry a human. And somewhere there were the shamans, like amongst the Incas and the Aztec, the shamans had a lot of power. The Chinese king was considered divine. Um, in India, the king was not considered divine, but the kings had to consult. I mean, to some extent, some kings were, some power of divinity everywhere, right up to the French Revolution. Just before the French Revolution, the French emperor was also considered as partaking of divine
So
power. So
whether
they
we
were
talk
peaceful.
about the church or the Hindu temple or whatever,
No,
my
I'm not talking about the church or temple. I'm talking about the people with power, the first stratification.
yes, but
Most things come
that
much later.
went against the
Initially, there were no churches or temples. It was
no, no,
just about people.
yeah. So what I'm saying is that was the beginning, I think, of somebody. I am superior. I'm more superior to you.
Not that person thought. You see, that would not have made the person superior when the
The society
collectivity
thought.
thought
Yeah,
the person was superior.
yeah, yeah. Okay,
Because initially, it was not the ego that was made was important. It was the collectivity that was important. The collectivity is still important. So the collectivity gave that status to that person. So, like one theory is that what was the first unequal strata? The inequality or the major, the fracturing comes between when state formation starts taking place or real hierarchy comes taking place, when you make a division between the producers and the non. In an indigenous community, even if you have a tribal chief, the tribal chief is working in his fields exactly as everybody else. His wives are still working in the field. A tribal chief does not become a chief by sitting at home and not doing anything. He becomes a chief for other reasons because he's able to produce more and he's able to give more. I'll come to that in another. Uh, when society collectively decides that these are certain people whom we should support, we should produce for them and feed them. They were probably the first master craftsmen, the very superior ironsmith, the very superior potter, the person who was able to make, architect, an astronomer. They were collectively identified as people having either more mana or divine power. And then the people would have said that no, you don't have to work. We will work. You do what you are doing because that is beneficial to society and we will support you. That is probably the incipient, the initial diversification which took place and which then gradually, it took thousands of years probably, it solidified into straight. So then not only were certain people identified as collectively, but then it became like they were superior by blood or by divine power. So their progeny, their children, like, so it could have been stratified. So that is, but what I'm trying to say is that the beginnings of stratification lies in powers outside of humans because the first human societies believed that all humans are equal. As humans, you cannot be more or less than others. If you are anything more, then it is an external divine intervention in some form or the other, which makes you superior. Uh, so, like, as I said, even today there are many societies that are so egalitarian that they believe that somebody who is able to do something is possessed, but only temporary. So once the power goes away, when the person again becomes ordinary. But that's not always, because sometimes shamans are always powerful. They have special powers which other people don't have, healing powers, things. That is when you were asking where it began. I said, this is where it. So to sum up, when I was talking about hunting food gathering societies as one mode of adaptation that worked, I have been, these are some points which we can summarize. Firstly, a philosophy where you do not consider the human species to be superior to others. It's a philosophy of equality, not only between humans, but between humans and everybody else. So, whether it's a tiger or a snake, and even today, it's not that these beliefs have died out. I mean, it's really, if you really go and talk to people in hinterlands and rural areas, I did field work again in a Himachal village, not very far from, cities and all, where people were quite modern and urbanized and everything, but yet in their weddings, they had special guests, guests of honor. And who were these guests of honor? These guests of honors were certain plants. I mean, I was so surprised that, before the wedding, these plants were invited into the house ceremoniously. They were established, in pots and in that house, treated as guests till the wedding was over, and then they were ceremoniously led out. So, for these people, there was no difference between plants and humans. The plants were the most honored, the guest of honor were plants. Similarly, they said we never kill snakes because when people die, they are reborn as snakes. So we do not know which snake is our ancestor. If I kill a snake tomorrow, that snake could have been my uncle or my grandfather. So they do not kill snakes. They still believe that snakes and humans are the same. In Hindu philosophy, we say the same soul goes through every cycle. So, it has also been part of our philosophy, but we tend to forget it. We don't tend to remember it. But this is a basic philosophy which is actually the most sustainable, which is the key to sustainability that do not consider. Now, in the modern times, we have again come back to philosophies like deep philosophy or eco philosophy or the concept of Gaia and things like that. But these have been there in the most ancient times. In the most ancient times, the people considered the earth as mother. And now we say that we must go back and go to the Gaia philosophy and call the earth as mother. But why did we leave it? We always had it and we still have it. Earth mother is a concept which is very inherent to most religions, many religions, in fact. So, this is one thing. Second is this sentiment of cooperation and sharing as the basis of adaptation. We as human beings cannot survive. And we learned that again and again during the COVID-19 pandemic. People became so conscious of this sharing that, okay, technologies collapse, everything collapses, but it is only humans who can reach out to each other. And we must develop that. In the Western countries, they realized it so much. In the US, very large number of people have left their jobs. They have gone over, exactly as I said, this possessiveness, competitiveness, wanting more and more. They have made this realization that this is stupid, this is illogical. Why do we want to earn more? If I have enough pension or if I have enough money left by which I can live comfortably, let me not work. And I mean, you will laugh at it. But me and my friend, we were sitting in a bookstore, a cafe and a bookstore called Barnes and Noble. And we were talking about this, and she was a professor also. So she was telling me that, look, so many people are retiring. And then we suddenly looked around and we found people were reading books on their tables. And most of them were reading a book on retirement plans. So why, in the US nowadays, you can't find anybody to employ. People are desperate. People can't do their businesses. They can't run their shops because nobody wants to work anymore. They don't. They find that all this accumulation and this and that and having more is very stupid. After the COVID-19 pandemic, people have undergone a philosophical transformation, at least in the first world country, where they were so driven by material things and they also already have a level of material, comfort. They don't want to work anymore. So you see, uh, this concept of property, this concept of possessiveness, this concept of competitiveness, these are not really very constructive. We used to think they are very constructive sentiments. Probably they are not. It is sharing, cooperativeness, reaching out to each other, which may be more rational, functional, and adaptive. We are not saying that these are very morally just because, abstract good. We are not talking of abstract good. We are talking of concrete things. Maybe concretely, from the point of view of human adaptation, these are better concepts. So we have to think about those. We have to think about the fact that poverty or material loss or this feeling of inferiority or being poor is also something which is only related to a particular frame of reference. And it is because we are in that frame of reference, we are thinking like that. But if we just consciously try to come out of it and think about it rationally, that why? What is the point? Why should I, have this kind of a greed or something? So the when I say that we go and study the hunter food gatherers, it is because not that we can ever go back to actually that way of life, but it can make us rethink about some very basic questions about our present day existence, because our present day existence is actually raising questions about our adaptability and about our capacity for sustainable life. Okay. Any more questions? So shall we end the lecture here? Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Very
ma'am.
good. Thank you very much.
Because we didn't take a break in between, so we
Yes,
can
yes, yes, yes.
we can take 10 minutes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for the session.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Welcome.
Thank you, ma'am.